Avem noi informații, doamnelor și domnilor. Jihadiștii îi instigă pe cei care îi urmează să atace ambasadele Israelului și ale statelor care sprijină cauza Israelului. Între timp, avem în exclusivitate un interviu cu expertul în eliberări de ostatici din Fâșia Gaza, care ține legătura cu membrii grupării Hamas în perioada aceasta și care încearcă pe cont propriu să ajute negocierile. Spune că Hamas va mai elibera ostatici pentru a întârzia ofensiva în forța Israelului, iar cheia eliberării celor peste 220 de oameni rămași captivi în mâinile teroriștilor este la Qatar. În plus, a explicat și disperarea membrilor Hamas să obțină combustibil. Aceștia vor motorină sau benzină pentru generatoarele care pompează aer în tuneluri, pentru că în lipsa lor nu ar putea să se ascundă în subteran. Vedem chiar acum interviul realizat în exclusivitate de colega mea, Alexandra Dino.
If Israel and Hamas would talk to each other directly, that would be the best, but neither side is willing to talk to the other. I do that, but at an official level, they're not willing to do that.
Did you talk to Hamas about these hostages, the 200,
yes,
over 200?
That's what I've been talking about since October 7th, emphasizing that they need to release the women, the children, the elderly, the sick, and the wounded.
What do they say?
At the beginning, they said, we're going to free all of our prisoners in Israeli prisons, 7,000. It's probably more than that today, because Israel has arrested a lot in the last 2 weeks. And they said we're on the road to victory. Lately, after the thousands and thousands of bombs that have fell on Gaza, they're looking for a solution. They want a ceasefire, and they're willing to release the civilian hostages. But they're also very difficult negotiators, because they say one thing, and then they add to it. They added the fuel. Yesterday, one of the Hamas leaders said to me, first, we need a ceasefire, then we'll talk about the hostages. And I told him that's not a deal. The deal is hostages, civilian hostages, for a ceasefire. Not give you a ceasefire and then you'll talk about the hostages. That's not going to happen. So the pressure is on right now. I've been expressing in the international and local media that the Americans need to pressure Qatar very strongly, because they have one of the keys. That Qatar is a state that supports terrorism. It has funded Hamas with more than $1 billion over the years, and it's hosting the entire Hamas leadership. And this says something about Qatar. I know they play this double game. They have helped in other cases in negotiations with the Taliban and in negotiations in Iraq. But I think now that the United States and others need to put their foot down and tell Qatar, you have to apply all the pressure possible on Hamas. If not, you have to expel the leadership of Hamas. And if you don't, we're going to declare Qatar a state that supports terrorism.
Can you tell me, how did the authorities manage to release the 4 people, and what they can do for the others?
Israel had nothing to do with the release of the 4 women who released. It was done completely by outsiders, by Qatar, the first 2 women, through the political leadership of Hamas sitting in Doha in Qatar. And the second 2 women were released through Egyptian efforts directly with Ezzedin al-Qassam, the military wing of Hamas. The first 2 women were American Israelis. They're from Chicago. They live in the United States. And it was the result of the direct involvement of President Biden and Secretary Blinken, who even gave their names to Hamas as people that they wanted to see released. The second 2 women, I believe, was a response from the Egyptians in competition with Qatar that we can do it better. We released 2 women who are Israeli citizens, have no second passport, and we did it with the military wing of Hamas. So they need to release those people. Now, Israel needs to give a ceasefire in response to the humanitarian civilian release of those hostages, and allow the people of Gaza some room to breathe, to find themselves, to get food and water, for aid to enter Gaza, because there's a humanitarian disaster, a catastrophe. This was not the Hamas that we knew before. They turned into ISIS, and they took prisoners, hostages, against their own beliefs. It says in the Quran that you don't kill a woman, a child, an elderly person, you don't hold them hostage. But the clock is ticking, and the Israeli army is getting impatient. There have been a number of incursions of small forces into Gaza on specific military missions, probably also looking for ways to rescue hostages through military acts, but also this is part of the enabling of the larger army to enter Gaza. I think that once the army enters Gaza in full force, the possibility of negotiating an agreement with Hamas will be very, very small. Their hostages, I assume, they are not in one place. The hostages are probably spread out. There are, according to reports, over 100 kilometers of tunnels underneath Gaza, so there's a lot of place to hide them. Hamas wants fuel now to be brought into Gaza, but they don't really want the fuel for the hospitals. They need fuel to pump the generators that pump air into the tunnels, because if they don't have air in the tunnels, they'll all die in the tunnels. Israel is refusing to have fuel brought into Gaza, and this is part of the tactics of also forcing them out of the tunnels. If they're not going to be released in the coming days, then we're probably going to see the Israeli land invasion into Gaza with a massive amount of tanks and artillery and infantry and special forces. And then the chances of negotiating the release of those hostages is going to be very, very difficult, if not impossible.
Informații de ultimă oră, doamnelor și domnilor. Din nou apar proteste de amploare în mai multe state. Mii de musulmani s-au strâns la Amman, în Iordania, în semn de protest față de genocidul comis de Israel. Chiar acum, în Fâșia Gaza, este ceea ce ieri ei strigă și, de asemenea, același lucru se va întâmpla în curând și la Doha, în Qatar, și acolo au fost anunțate proteste împotriva Israelului. Toate detaliile și noi imagini din cele două țări, imediat revenim cu noi informații de la ora 14.